Record to the cloud. There we go. Now we are recording. So for those of you just joining us, we are jumping back in on the anatomy of a buyer transaction. And you also have Donna Doyle to thank for the fact that this is actually being recorded, because I was not on the ball on that this evening. So
Strike buyer transaction, seller transaction.
say it again, Frank.
I said, for the record, strike buyer transaction and make that seller transaction.
Oh, did I misspeak on that as well? So yes, the anatomy of a seller transaction. We will get through this. I promise. I promise. I have not been drinking. Imagine if I drank. Oh my goodness. All right. So once the offer is negotiated and acceptable to both parties, you're going to just simply ask the buyer's agent to rewrite everything with all of the new agreed upon terms, get that signed, and then get that back to you ASAP, right? I think your document, it actually doesn't say within 24 hours. I used to say within 24 hours. I'm going to tell you, with today's fast moving market, I think 24 hours is kind of way too long, right? Like if you want this house, we'll rewrite it and sign it and get it back to us like in an hour. That's kind of where I sit, right? Or minimally this afternoon. It always fascinates me when people say things like, oh, well, you know, we'll get that back to you tomorrow. Oh, no. Let's be clear about the time expectations here, right? By tomorrow, we could have 3 more offers and we'll be moving on with somebody else. So let's show the urgency that is necessary based on the market of the moment. Number 11, you're also going to make sure that the buyer's agent delivers to you the following information: who the buyer is using as their attorney, depending on the document that they're submitting on, right? If they're submitting it on a 4-page standard contract, that information is part of page 4, right? That's typically filled in on that last page. If they're using a purchase agreement or an offer to purchase, oftentimes not, right? Unless it's a custom form. So you'll need to know who the attorney is. And that needs to happen like right up front. Please don't decide that you can wait a couple of days for that information, because the information that you receive once the seller executes it needs to be sent to the seller's attorney ASAP, certainly within same day and or next morning, depending on the time frame there, so that the attorney can get moving on either drawing up a new contract or reviewing the contract. If you're on a standard 4-page contract, reviewing that within the time period of the attorney review. So you need to know who the buyer's attorney will be, because they need to be a part of the conversation relatively quickly. You also need to know who they're going to be using as a home inspector and when those are going to be scheduled for. And of course, if there's a septic system, who's going to inspect that and when. The other question I used to ask is, will the buyer actually make application with the lender who you presented the pre-qual with, right? Sometimes the answer to that is no, right? They grab a pre-qual from somebody, but they're really going to make application with this person over here. Okay, well, if that's the case, I need to know that up front as the listing agent, and I'd like some documentation from the person you're actually going to make application with, so that the sellers now know that the person you're making application with has gone through minimally assets and income and perhaps credit, so that you are as approvable in their world as the letter that you received. Does that make sense to everybody? Right, so asking that, making the assumption that the buyers are just simply going to make application with Chase because that's who the pre-qual is from, is an assumption that sometimes ends up coming back to bite you. If they make a different choice, if now all of a sudden they're attempting to be underwritten in a program that they're not really qualified for or whatever, right? So just ask that question. 11B and C, who are the inspectors? That's an important conversation as well. I just want to kind of reiterate to you that there are some inspectors. Debbie and I got to a point where we forbade, and when I say we, I mean our sellers, because we had conversations with the sellers that said, by the way, once you have a buyer in place, if they choose this particular inspector, we strongly advise you to allow us to go back and say, nope, no can do. Seller's not going to let that person in their house. Pick somebody else. Why do you think we did that?
Just a history of bad inspections.
They were
Well,
alarmists.
Well, yeah, we had, all inspectors are a little, can sometimes be a little irritating, right? That's kind of par for the course, just based on the way that they have to speak and the way that they sometimes write reports, right? That on the buyer's side is just something that you need to make sure buyers understand, right? That inspectors speak a specific language, and sometimes it's the language of Chicken Little, right? The sky is falling, the sky is falling. That's just the way it works. In our scenario, we had experiences, not just an experience, but experiences with certain inspectors, really just the one that we put on the absolute no way list, where he just wasn't accurate. And when I say, well, he wasn't factual, he would say things that he was making up, like, well, there's mold in the basement. I'm like, where? Okay, like, is there a picture? Can you point anyone in the direction? Or did you just feel damp when you went down there? Like, those are two different things. And so he would say things that would tank or kill deals. And it wasn't that we were averse to a professional coming in and finding things that were absolutely really wrong and having conversations with our sellers about potentially correcting them. Instead, we wanted to be certain. We had sellers sometimes say to us, well, won't the buyers then decide not to buy our house if they're really married to their inspector? And my answer to that was twofold. Number one, I don't think I've ever met a buyer who was so married to a home inspector over a house that they were going to buy to live in, that if we went back to them and said, we have experienced issues, and if you haven't, that's awesome, but we have. And so therefore, in order to buy this house, you'll have to choose a different inspector. And here was the thing. Even if the buyers said, I can't believe you asked that, that's outrageous, we're not going to buy the house, it wouldn't matter, because if we allowed him to inspect the house, they weren't going to buy it anyway. Because our experience was everything he inspected was falling down, and the only way to fix it was burn it down and build from new, right? So we found that taking a stand on that with certain people was sometimes necessary. Yes, ma'am, Donna.
I just had an inspection 2 weeks ago, and when we got they sent us for some reason the entire copy of the inspection, but there were pictures in there that weren't even of my client's house. Totally not their house. I mean, and they also had a broken electrical meter and said that all of the outlets throughout the house were miswired. And it turns out his thing was broken. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, so it's the more transactions you have under your belt, you start to kind of see trends, right? And that's what happened with us. We just started to see a trend that every time this one guy showed up, I have no idea if he's in business anymore. I should look that up, because if he is, I'll let you know who it is. But if he's not, there's no reason to drag his name through the mud, right? So what's the point of me saying that? There's a reason why we ask up front who's going to be doing the work, so that we can judge whether or not there's there are any issues. Most of the time there are no issues, but just know that without asking the question and without putting that question as part of your process, if there were issues, you wouldn't know about it until they were unable to be redirected. Number 12, once you have the above information, you're going to have a contract information sheet prepared. Now, I know there are a lot of people who are still using contract information sheets. That's just a one-page synopsis of who the sellers are, who the buyers are, who their attorneys are, who their agents are, what the terms of the transaction are, price, closing date, is there financing, a list of inclusions, exclusions, just all in a one-page little form. I'm told that some listing agents simply aren't using it any longer. I still kind of like it. You get to make a choice. It's on the list simply because I think it's nice to have a one-pager for each of my listing transactions. with all the relevant information on it. So you get to make a choice about number 12. Number 13, give a copy of all the paperwork, including contract information sheet to, Sorry, so go back to 12, because halfway through 12, I skipped over you getting the supporting documents to the seller's attorney, right? So halfway through 12, it says, get all the supporting documents to both attorneys. I personally like, as a listing agent, to include both attorneys on the signed offer to purchase and any signed disclosures, so that both parties have it. There are some people who only send to the seller's attorney and then expect that attorney will send it over to the other attorney. For me as a listing agent, I don't think there's anything wrong with having both attorneys get the information so that they know it. They know to be on the lookout for a call from each other to begin working on next steps. And then, of course, 13, make sure that all that paperwork gets to your MCA inside of your market center within 3 business days of a fully executed offer document, right? And that's a really important time frame. A lot of people think, well, as long as I have that, that in before the closing. No. When you have a transaction, when something comes together, you have 3 business days to get that information to us. We base that on the buyer side, which says you have 3 business days once you have a buyer agreement to have funds deposited into escrow. We'll talk about that later tonight or tomorrow with our buyer conversation. And the idea is the same on the seller side. So we just keep everything the same. Within 3 days, when you have a deal, make sure the market center has all the supporting documentation. Make sure that it's submitted through command, and you have a commissions tab done. Right, all that stuff happens within 3 days of you putting a deal together. If it falls apart, well, then terminate it inside of our system and start again when a new deal comes together. But don't wait. There's too many times where we're called in the office about your transactions, and if nothing's been submitted, we all look kind of foolish because we're like looking around for a transaction in our system that you haven't submitted yet. An attorney needs a piece of information and can't find you, so they call us. Some attorneys don't go to you, they come straight to us. And so now the staff is struggling to find documentation or confirm information, and we don't have it from you. Yes, Donna.
Do you just submit it in command, or do you have to also let them know somehow that you have a new deal and it's all in command? Just submit it?
Yeah, when you get it into command and push that submit button, that all goes to them. So that is the way you let them know. Absolutely. And beginning, if you're unclear about what that process looks like, Joe McHugh is going to be doing, I think, sessions at 11:30 Monday through Thursday, starting. That start this week? No, I think it starts next week and for 2 solid weeks. So every single day, 11:30, he'll go through another version of stepping that transaction through the command process. So if that's something that's new to you, or you could use a refresher or have some questions on it, plug into Joe's 11:30s starting next Monday.
Rick?
Frank, did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, actually 2 now. Is that Joe McHughes? That's in addition to, you said you were going to do something on forms?
Forms is at 1 o'clock on Monday. That's the offer to purchase forms. I'll go through the 3 different versions and walk you through that. Yes.
Okay. And my initial question was about this submitting to the MCA. This is the first time that documents have to be submitted to the market center, like not at offer time or any modifications or inspections. None of that has to be submitted except for the dual agency, if it exists.
So great question. So here's what that looks like. As a listing agent, right now, I'll keep it relegated to the listing side since that's what we're talking about right now. On the listing side, when you take a new listing, the new listing agreement needs to go to the market center, right? So again, within 3 days, if you take a new listing, you need to submit that in so that we have all the supporting documents. So the new listing paperwork goes first. Then when you sell that listing, you don't send anything into the market center until you have a transaction, you have a deal, you have a fully executed contract, and then all the fully executed supporting documents, all that gets sent in to the market center, but not until you have a fully executed transaction to submit. So when an offer comes in, no, you handle that without including the market center. When we don't really get involved so much on the inspection side of things. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So 14, once the inspection dates are set, be certain to inform the seller. And I say that because I have experienced this, where as my business grew, I didn't have all my I's dotted and T's crossed. And I had a seller call me one day at about 8:45, say, "Hey, Rick, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fine. How are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm sort of okay. I'm here in my nightgown, feeding my 3 children. And there's a whole posse of people standing out on my front porch saying that they're here for the 9 o'clock inspection. And they wondered if they could get started a little early in the basement." Yep, I forgot to tell her. Which is a big reason why I give you these lists, right? So that you can use a checklist to not forget. So that's why it's on there. I know it seems kind of dorky, like, well, yeah, no kidding, you have to let the seller know. Well, you do, and I forgot one time. We worked it out. She didn't hate me forever, right? We just redirected the inspector to the external while she finished feeding her kids and got everybody dressed and then got everybody out. So we made it work, and yet I looked pretty foolish, right? So make sure that doesn't happen to you, and make sure that you keep that task front and center so that you can check it off. Number 15, report the property as under agreement, which today would be under, I think the code is under contract or under contract continue to show, depending on your seller's desires. Continuing to show means that you've accepted an offer and that the seller is interested in obtaining, potentially obtaining additional offers by showing the property. And under contract just simply means they've accepted an offer and they've decided not to show the property anymore, right? So, so be certain that you have a conversation with your seller around which they want so that you can report it properly. And this says within 48 hours, please note that needs to be updated. This is dating my document here because the rule changed just about a year ago to 24 hours. You now have to change that status within 24 hours of the status change occurring. Number 16, stop by the inspection to check in and see if there's any information you can provide, or give it just a quick call to the buyer's agent, right? If you're not going, if geography prevents you from stopping by, or you choose not to stop by, right? I simply say this because as a listing agent, you are not to be there during the inspections, right? It's a common courtesy for the buyers. Sometimes our sellers say things like, well, why you represent me? Why wouldn't you be there? And the answer is because this is the moment of the period of time where the buyer gets to come in unfettered by any owners of the property or their representatives and review the property with professionals that they have hired to assess and report back. And so it may be that you want to check in with the buyer's agent to see if there are any questions. I actually had an inspection on something that I was purchasing today. I don't go to mine anymore. My property manager goes on my behalf. However, I got a phone call saying, okay, the keys to the basement and the 3rd floor are missing and the inspector needs to get in there, right? Luckily, about 3 minutes after I got that phone call, the listing agent called me and said, hey, just wanted to make sure that things are going okay. I said, okay, well, I'm not there. However, I just got this phone call. And so she sent the seller over to handle whatever was going to be handled, right? So checking in just to make sure everything's okay, not a bad idea. You can do that by a quick phone call, a quick text, a drop by, whatever makes sense for you. But on the listing side, that's kind of your role in the inspection. You're not there sitting in the kitchen or wandering around listening to what's going on, right? Number 17, at this point, you'll need to keep all parties in action, right? This is when there's kind of a lull, right? You've had all this hot and heavy stuff. You had all these offers, you were talking about them, everyone's getting their contract signed and doing their inspections and all this stuff. And then you hit this period of time where less happens. And so even though less is happening on a daily basis, you have to continue to remind people about the things that they need to be doing. So it's about keeping all the plates spinning, and recognizing that it is your role to keep all those plates spinning. So having a system in place to connect every 2 or 3 days during this kind of lull period with your clients, the sellers, with the buyer's agent to make sure everything's still on track, with the seller's attorney just to make sure that they don't need assistance in any way, shape, or form, right? What could that look like? Oh, I don't know. You call the seller's attorney to say, hey, just checking in on 123 Main Street, anything you need from me? And the attorney says, well, I'm really glad you called because I've reached out to the buyer's attorney like 17 times and I'm not getting any response back. This is what we need. We need this document, or we need the contracts returned, or we need whatever. Can you please reach out to the other agent and see what's going on? Right. So sometimes you making some of those calls, they don't necessarily get made outbound to you. You making those checking calls can reveal issues that you can then step in and help resolve that maybe no one was talking about. So communication is the point there. Keep talking to everyone, even though there's not a ton that needs to necessarily be done each and every day. My rule of thumb is if 72 hours has gone by, I need to be talking to everybody again. So again, that rule of 3 days, I'm going to make even if my call is, hey, Frank, it's Rick Scott, just wanted to check in and see how things were going. Anything I can do for you? I haven't heard about any changes. I think we're on track. Everything seems great. Have you heard anything different? No, excellent. You know what? Just wanted to check in and say hi. Have a good day. Bye. Right? Because now Frank knows that I've been thinking about him and his transaction. The worst thing you can do is during that 30 or 40 day kind of lull period is not communicate with anybody, especially your own seller clients. That's the perfect way. You might as well send them a telegram that says, hey, you are a commission and a commission only to me. I'll pick up again with you at closing. Right? Nothing says commission breath worse than no communication. Number 18, once inspections are done, you can expect to hear from the buyer's agent within about 48 hours regarding any items that may need to be addressed. Please note that if you don't hear back from the buyer's agent about any inspection items that might need to be addressed, as the listing agent, please don't assume that that means that there are no issues to be addressed, right? I can see on some of your faces that you, like me, you maybe have made that mistake, right? Because here's the thing. When you make that assumption, all of a sudden the sellers think that there's nothing to be handled. And then a week and a half later, the buyer's agent says, oh, did we ever talk about that whole mitigation of radon thing that's going to have to happen? Like, whoa, wait a minute, what? And now you're arguing about dates in the contract and who's passed it and when should that have happened? And everyone starts pointing fingers. And I'll tell you, in my opinion, there's only one place to point the finger in that scenario, and that is back to the listing agent, right? The listing agent needs to have their arms around all of those moving parts. That's what you get paid for. You're now the conductor of the orchestra that is this closing machine. And so if in fact things come back, or if they don't come back, within 48 hours, you need to be on the phone to say, hey, I'm checking in. I'm assuming the fact that I haven't heard from you about inspection items, that we don't have any. If that is the case, please send me an email or a text that indicates that. We're good to move forward, no inspection items. If there are inspection items, please send me an email with supporting documentation so that we can have that conversation on the seller's side and see what they're going to do. Make sense?
Rick,
Yes.
I was smirking because I was thought to myself, has anybody, I mean, and I'm curious, is that this happened to you? Because it's not happened to me. Had an inspection report that had no items that had to be addressed in it? Does that ever happen?
Well, so the answer is the inspection report maybe doesn't have anything that needs to be addressed, but there are certainly buyers who there are either they've waived the contingency of the inspection, right? Remember, those are two different things. Waiving an inspection and waiving the contingency of the inspection aren't the same thing. I waive the contingency of inspection in everything, almost everything I purchase. I still have my inspections. It just means that if something horrible pops up, it's not a reason why I'm going to cancel the contract. I don't have that out as a contingency, right? So recognize that there are a lot of times where an inspection is done and things pop up, but buyers just don't address them. In the last 12 months, the idea that inspections are done, even if they're contingent, and buyers don't bring issues to the table because they don't want to be bumped to the side. Because remember, the second you bring an inspection item to the table, you're basically making a counteroffer to the contract. So the seller then has the right to say, no, we're not doing that. And now you've voided the contract, and so we're going to somebody else. So there are a lot of times, especially in a fast-paced market, where buyers will do inspections, and even if the contingency exists, not ask for things to be done. Does that help with that?
Yeah, I guess I was surprised because I've only worked on deals where the buyers definitely raised issues based on the inspections.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about at least, well, let's talk about it from this perspective. It is my opinion. One of the things that I used to do with sellers, even in a fast-paced market, I would set the expectation, right? And I think this is one of the big holes in our industry, is that agents, whether they represent the buyer or the seller, don't set proper expectations about what inspections are actually for, right? You heard me say this last week, I think. Inspections, in my opinion, are conducted such that the new buyers have a professional walk them through the property and teach them how to use their new house. The inspection is not conducted to find all the bad things wrong with the house and have a renegotiation. And if more of our industry would have the courage to have that conversation with both buyers and sellers, we'd have less issues that popped up from inspections, because now everyone would understand why those inspections are being done. Why do you think the inspection industry has turned into the let's find something wrong industry? They only took those cues from the real estate industry. We pushed them in that direction, right? Thinking that we were advocating for buyer clients. I'm not sure that's really advocacy, right? If there's something really wrong, I get it. But the idea that when you buy a 50-year-old used house, that you're going to come back and say, you know, there's a piece of rotten wood on the deck and the one window in the bedroom doesn't work all that well, and there's no GFI outlets in the bathrooms. Well, my answer to that is, well, yes, yes, and yes. Do you still want to buy the house or not? It's 50 years old. Right? A lot of things worked better on me 50 years ago too, that don't work quite as well now. I still soldier through my day. So I guess the on the seller side, the thing I used to mention to sellers was, look, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, please note, the buyers will now do a building inspection on your property. What I would like for you to prepare for is set aside mentally about $3,000. Now remember, I'm giving you best practices that aren't necessarily being used today, right now, when sellers have so much power and so much choice, right? For me, I didn't change my policy, whether the market was moving quickly or moving slowly. So for me, the conversation with the seller was, I'd like you to mentally set aside $3,000 just in case anything comes back from the inspections. Well, what do you mean? What could possibly come back? I don't know, and neither do you. That's the whole point. Inspections sometimes yield unintended issues, unknown issues. And so if you mentally set aside the $3,000 now, and something comes up and comes back that costs way less than that, well, you'll be thrilled and be happy to move forward with the transaction because you've already mentally set aside $3,000. You see the point? What if we just did a better job of setting expectations on the seller side? And instead, we don't say anything. And then any little issue that comes back to us, the sellers are like, oh my goodness, what are they asking for? They're renegotiating the whole deal. Well, no, they're not really doing that. Your septic system is broken. So let's have a conversation around that. I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you were purchasing a property, the day you moved in, would you want the septic system to work properly so that when you flush the toilet, everything went the way it was supposed to? Right? Sometimes we need to do something to the house to have it convey properly. Now, let me ask this question so that we don't have to argue about it tomorrow when we revisit it on the buyer side. In the state of Connecticut, what do sellers by law need to address in terms of inspection items? What are those things? What's that list, that short list of things?
Health and safety?
So health and safety. Anything else on that short list? Do you all sense a trick question? Is that why you're not answering? You'd be right. You have learned. You clearly know me. The answer to the question in the state of Connecticut is sellers have a legal responsibility to address nothing. Zero. The state of Connecticut is an as-is state, which means properties can convey as is. There is no government agency that will step in and say, oh, you have to have a smoke detector. Oh, you have to have a this. Oh, you have to have a that. You have to fix that. Oh, your radon is high. You have to mitigate that before you can sell. None of that is true. Yes, ma'am.
Not even smoke detectors? Our attorney always makes the seller go get them. That's not a law?
Well, so what the law says is the existence of smoke detectors and carbon monoxide needs to be disclosed, and or you pay the fee, right? So there's another fee, just like the property condition disclosure form. And so do you have to go and fix it? No, there may be something else you have to do if you don't have the requisite whatever's installed, but it may be as simple as, I'm not taking responsibility for that, I'll just write the check. Right? Understand, in New York doesn't have a smoke detector and carbon monoxide law, but in New York, the property condition disclosure form is almost never completed by the seller. Almost never, because most New York attorneys just have them write the $500 check. When we listed my grandmother's house 2 weeks ago, I wasn't even given the choice. The agent didn't even say, here are the disclosure forms. Do you want to complete them? Because they're just so used to having that just be a closing fee. We're not providing that. Now in Connecticut, most sellers do complete them, right? It's completely different. Just so you're aware of that, right? So the idea of, sometimes I get into arguments when people say, well, the radon is high. The EPA there's a law, the EPA says that you have to mitigate that. That is simply not true. The EPA has guidelines about what the numbers should be. What are those numbers for radon in the air? Do you know? It's measured in picocuries per liter of air. And Don is telling us it's 4.0. So 4.0 or under is the EPA guideline for a radon reading in the air. Anybody know what it is in the water? Also measured in picocuries per liter of water.
Is it 0.06? I'm just guessing.
It's not, it's 5,000 picocuries per liter of water, right? So 4 and 5,000, those are the two numbers, but however, they are just simply guidelines from the EPA. There is no law in our state or in the country. There's no federal law or state law that says if your numbers come in high, you have to fix it. Now, once those issues, the larger, bigger issues pop up, the seller is then supposed to, because then people say to me, well, why would a seller ever fix anything then if they don't legally have to? Well, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to kind of crawl back into their property condition disclosure form after they've been made aware of these things and change them so that they're now disclosing to every other additional buyer, right? So if they say no to one buyer who wants that radon corrected and the buyers walk away, they're supposed to now change the disclosure so that every other buyer is made aware. So the conversation we get to have is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, understand that you can say no to these buyers. However, there's almost no buyer if the radon's at 8.0 who's going to not ask you to correct that. I'm curious, for $1,200 as a correction, is it really worth losing buyer after buyer after buyer? Now, some sellers say things like, well, we just won't tell them. Understood. Please understand that you and I both have a proactive duty to disclose. And even if you're unwilling to do that, I don't have a choice. As a licensee of the state of Connecticut, I have to, now that I know that, I have to proactively disclose that to any buyer that comes to your property. Make sense? How you kind of handle that with the sellers? All righty.
Hey, Rick,
Yes.
even though some of those items from the inspection do not legally prevent the sale from going through, they could prevent a mortgage being approved, right?
Yes, that's a great point, Frank. So yes, there are certain issues that if they end up in the contract, right? So the only way the lender would know about these things is if they ended up in the contract, right? So I don't advise that. Like, I always used to have ask for little side agreements, right? For any inspection items that were going to be handled, because oftentimes if the lender is looking for the contract and all these things are listed, they get a little panicky, right? The other issue is if it's something that is visible that the appraiser can see, right? That could get in the way of financing. So yes, Frank, you're 100% right. There are certain issues that pop up where it could prevent financing from being simple. It usually doesn't prevent financing. There's usually a way to kind of maneuver through that and around that. And yet it can make financing tricky if it's something, if the septic system has failed and that becomes known to the lender, well, nobody's going to actually close on the loan. The lender's not going to loan the money knowing that the septic system has failed. And the reason for that, by the way, is if they have to foreclose on the property, they then have to convey the property. And so they don't want to inherit a property that now where the toilets don't flush properly, because now they'll have to go and spend $30,000 or $40,000 putting in a new septic system in order to sell it. Right. So that's why lenders sometimes get in the way of conveying with bigger issues. Without really big issues, though, we don't see that pop up all that often.
And can't you just put on a signed form, it's for closing cost credits, even if it's for repairs?
Yeah. So yes, the other way, the other workaround there is you have some language in the contract that still covers the parties, except it does it in a more generic way that lenders will accept. Right. To me, what that really is saying is the lender saying, look, I want to lend you this money because I want to make money by lending you this money. And so let's not confuse ourselves with telling us too much, right? Because everybody knows the language Donna just said kind of means there's something wrong and we're going to fix it, right? But they look the other way on that. All right, let's see. Where were we? So 19, keep tabs on the mortgage, right? Number 20, inform the sellers when the appraisal is going to take place. Again, that's the same issue. You just want to keep the seller informed about what's happening and when. Number 21, check in with the seller's attorney to ensure that you know when the contracts are completed and have been sent to the buyer's attorney, right? And again, so all of these things kind of sound like, well, why wouldn't that be the attorney's job? If you want to cede control of getting your clients to the closing table to other people, that's on you. And unfortunately, the results of that are also on you, right? But as a listing agent, I like to be the ringmaster. I like to be the conductor of that orchestra. I'm going to keep my hand in each of those things and make sure I have a checklist about where that process is so that it doesn't delay or cause issues. Number 23, negotiate any inspection items through the satisfaction of both parties, right? So that was kind of happening while some of this other stuff was going on, some of the check-in was going on. Once it's completed, again, draw up a list. I like to have some kind of a list about what everyone's agreed to. Because when you just do that verbally, guess what? You get to a closing table and someone says, well, wait a minute, they were supposed to fix the deck. And the other side says, no, we weren't. I don't remember that, right? You should write this down because I have found this to be an issue, especially in real estate transactions. And it's this thing called selective amnesia. Parties sometimes get selective amnesia. I remember everything else we talked about. I just don't remember that one where I said yes to that, right? I had some selective amnesia come up earlier today in terms of an agreement that somebody had made, right? Which is why I always ask people to, you know what, do me a favor. Could you send that to me via an email so that I can just keep track of what we talked about? Or I'll go and reiterate based on our conversation, here's what we agreed to. If you could please just confirm back. And so when this selective amnesia issue popped up earlier today, I just got to type in that person's name, bring up the email, shoot it back and say, just so we're clear, here was the conversation. Oh, yes, that's right. I'm not saying people are bad people. I'm just saying selective amnesia is a thing. Good, bad, or in between, selective amnesia is a thing. Always have some written backups so that you understand what was agreed to and when. Number 25, put a star next to that one because it's one that everyone forgets about, and it's probably one of the most important ones on the tail end of this list. And that is ask the sellers to begin packing. I can't tell you, as a listing agent for most of my time in the field, man, oh man, how many times someone would get to a closing and call me and say, the sellers are like still here. They're still moving things out. We're supposed to close in 3 hours, right? Sellers sometimes make really bad decisions about how long they wait to start that process. Mostly, I think, because they're unaware of how much crap they have accumulated over the course of time living in the house, right? I'm guilty of it myself. Go into my basement, like, okay, when was the last time I touched half of this stuff? Like, I think when I moved in, like we moved the box in, put it down, it's still there. Why do I have it? Why do I need that? Attics are always a big thing, right? So what we've been doing, once a year, we get a dumpster. That's cathartic. If you haven't done it, try it. They don't cost that much money. It's like $300. Get yourself a big old dumpster, a 15 or 20-yard dumpster, and challenge yourself to fill it. We walk around closets and like, okay, when was the last time I wore this? Never donate or toss, donate, toss, donate, toss. Once a year, fill that dumpster, get rid of all that crap. Because someday you'll be a seller and you'll be thrilled that you don't have to worry about it all at the same time when you decide to be a seller. So again, encourage your folks to begin packing way early, right? Way early. Number 26, once you have a signed contract and agreement to all inspection items and a mortgage that's moving along, again, there's that period of lull. Please make sure that you're reaching outbound to all the parties at least every 3 days to keep everybody in motion. Number 27, keep the office in the loop if things start to change, right? Closing dates sometimes change. Sometimes they get accelerated, sometimes they get delayed. We need to know because we invoice the transaction for your services, right? And if the invoice doesn't arrive in time and the closing arrives, well, then we start getting frantic phone calls from either the attorney's office or from you because you've received a call from the attorney's office saying there's no invoice, there's no invoice. Well, if we didn't know that the closing was going to happen 2 or 3 weeks earlier, we may not have sent the invoice in time because we thought we still had time to get that out. Generally speaking, we invoice transactions anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks ahead of the closing on a rotating schedule, depending on the time of month of the closing. So just know that and keep Sam, Deb, or Lisa in the loop if things start to change. 28, once a closing date's been settled on, mark your calendars for about a week prior because you're going to start getting hot and heavy with the sellers all over again, right? My plan was kind of outlined for you in number 29. Remind the sellers of the following. So this was like 7 days, 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, just to kind of start working my way back into their lives daily, just to make sure that they were on track and everybody else was on track. And so it would be just daily reminder calls. You know, hey, just making sure that you've put in transfer notices to any utilities that you may have to transfer. If they have oil heat, they need to schedule an oil tank reading, right? What does that mean? Why would the oil company have to come out?
Because they get reimbursed for any oil that's left in the tank.
Exactly right, right? The buyers buy the oil that's in the tank from the sellers. Only if the sellers actually have the oil tank stuck and a reading delivered to the closing attorney. So again, within that last week, you want to make sure that they're calling. In the old days, we used to do that for them. And a lot of companies have moved off of having third parties be able to order anything for anyone, right? So a lot of the services that we used to be able to do as a service to the sellers, we just can't anymore because we're not the actual client, right? So reminding them that they have to get those things done, and then staying on top of it to make sure it's checked off of your list that the closing attorney has received that, is the follow-up there. Remind them to speak to their attorney if there's anything else that might need apportioning, right? Apportioning means if, say the water is public water, right? Sometimes owners prepay a quarter in advance for a certain amount of water, right? They apportion taxes and rents and things like that at certain closings, but there are some times where things like water need to be apportioned. So just have them check in with the attorney to make sure that nothing else might need to be apportioned so that everyone's ready at the closing table. Take care of any change of address, right? Just again, these are just reminder calls. This was my list. If it's useful to you, if you have better ones, then go ahead and use those. But I would just call to say, hey, just checking in. We're 4 days from closing, and I just want to remind you to make sure that you change your, send in a change of address card to the post office so that your mail is forwarded. And then the very next one is, make sure that you have some kind of plan with DMV to change the address on your license. In the state of Connecticut, I believe you have 30 days, but you only have 30 days to change your address. The last time I moved, I think I changed my address like 9 months later. I didn't quite remember that, but I think the law, the DMV rule is 30 days. So again, just reminding them of that. Make sure that they're gathering all the keys for the house, because you do want to leave a little pile of keys for the next owner. Make sure that
Rick,
gathering any warranties or manuals
Rick,
for appliance. Yes.
regarding the keys, when do you suggest taking the keys out of the lockbox or any keys that you have that let you in and out of the house?
Yeah, I'm gonna get there in just a second. We cover that in another couple of lines. So to gather any warranties or manuals for appliances that are being left, always helpful for the new owners. And so 29H, remind them, I couldn't figure out what that meant. Remind them of any appliances that are staying, right? I've had so many sellers forget that the second refrigerator in the garage or the basement is not supposed to be moved. So like before the movers come, if there's anything unusual about what's staying or what's going, make sure that you just remind them of that. Or else it comes up at the closing table that day. Well, they left that, we wanted it out. Or frankly, I had sellers once, we got a phone call from the agent doing the walkthrough saying, there's no appliances here. And I said, well, by no appliances, what do you mean? And she said, well, what I mean is there's no refrigerator, there's no stove, there's no anything. And all the appliances were included in the listing, very specifically. And the movers came in and took all the appliances. The sellers were already moved like they were moving across the country. They were already out there. And so they sent the movers in. And again, it wasn't the seller's intention that those things were removed, but the movers took them. So then we had to figure out compensation because the truck was already gone and like halfway across the country. So the sellers had to figure out compensation for the buyers for all of these. It was a refrigerator, it was a stove, it was a washer, it was a dryer, right? It was all the appliances that usually convey or oftentimes convey in this instance, they were in the listing and were to convey. and had to reimburse what they did with them once they got them out there, because they didn't need them in their new place, right? So either dumped them or sold them or whatever. So again, if it's unusual, or even if it's typical, just a reminder, right? If the circumstance is unusual where the seller maybe isn't there, just to remind everybody what's supposed to stay and what's supposed to go. Number 30, check in as closing day approaches. Find out if the sellers need assistance in any way meeting the deadline to be packed and out of the house, right? Number 31, perhaps send lunch to the seller's house on move out day. I'm going to tell you what, of all the things that Debbie and I ever did for our seller clients, this one, as dopey as it sounds, is one of the ones that they remember the most. And I want you to think about it, right? It's moving day. They've got them, they've got their 2 kids, they've got everything packed up. There's nothing in the fridge. Everyone's dirty. Everyone's trying to kind of figure out what's going where. The movers are there doing their thing. So what we typically do is we make sure that we know when the moving day is. We ask the seller how many people will be there at moving day, including how many movers. And then we just send lunch for everybody, including the movers. Because the last time I moved, the movers at like 11:30 were still taking all of my furniture out of the house, putting it all on the front lawn to figure out how it was going to fit into the truck. And I'm standing on the front lawn looking over at the horizon and seeing these big storm clouds rolling in, looking at my furniture on the front lawn, not covered in anything. And I'm thinking, okay, well, got a little bit of time here. Let's maybe start moving this stuff into the truck. And as I was kind of thinking through who am I going to talk to about this, the 3 moving guys got into the truck and started to pull away. I'm like, whoa, where are you going? They're like, dude, it's lunch. I'm like, lunch? What about my furniture? P.S. They went to lunch. They came back. The rain held off. They got my furniture in. But I'm not sure that they knew that that was going to happen. They went to lunch. So just that experience alone of my own says to me, you know what, everyone appreciates if everyone just, including the movers, just stay on the property. And so we would send salad and pizza and soda, or we would send, whatever you call them, a hero, grinder, hoagie, whatever you want to call the, depending on where you're from, right? Send a 3 or 4 foot grinder over, half vegetarian, half Metasaurus or whatever they call them. And you just send them on over with your compliments so that nobody has to freak out or leave on moving day. Again, just a suggestion. We always found that people were so appreciative of that. Number 32. Here's Dana, here's your answer. Number 32, remove the lockbox from the house, order the sign down, or remove the sign in and marketing materials, right? So you're doing that just ahead of the buyer's walkthrough. Now, I say just ahead of the buyer's walkthrough, unless the buyer's agent still needs the key and you don't want to have to make them come to the office, right? So in that scenario, you might leave everything, you might take everything else down and leave the lockbox with the key on until after the walkthrough, and then go and get that lockbox. Just so we're clear, I am not a fan of having buyer's agents remove the lockbox on your behalf and then hoping that the lockbox eventually makes it back to the office, right? There's a part of that is because I buy the lockboxes, right? So I also know how many of them don't ever return home, right? So we have this fleet of lockboxes out there that are sitting God knows where. And so I don't love that approach. I would rather have it be you who goes and takes the lockbox off after the fact. I would also rather it be you, the listing agent, takes the lockbox off and then brings the key for the house to the attorney. And I get a lot of pushback on what I'm about to say, because I know it's inconvenient. I get it. And there are a lot of shortcuts that are done with keys where the listing agent will say to the buyer's agent, hey, you know what, either do me a favor, here's the lockbox code, just take the lockbox off and return it to my office. By the way, once somebody else has the lockbox code to remove the shackle code to remove it, it might as well be their lockbox, because the shackle code is the security on that lockbox for the owners of the lockboxes. So sharing that shackle code, again, not a big fan of. And what's worse is that in those scenarios, oftentimes listing agents will say, oh, and by the way, just take the key out. And when you're done with the walkthrough, lock everything up and then just bring it to the closing. Well, a lot of agents don't go to closings anymore. So what ends up happening is the buyer's agent just hands the key to the buyers at the walkthrough and then hopes for the best. Let me tell you a couple stories. Story number one. This happened to me. My listing. We go to a closing back in the days where we all actually went to a closing, right? Go to the closing, we wait, ends up being a dry closing. What does that mean? Right, the money, the loan doesn't fund, right? It's called a dry closing when the money doesn't arrive. So the money doesn't fund, can't really finish the closing. Everyone agrees, okay, we'll meet back here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That will give the mortgage, the lender time to funnel the funds and allow us time to process it and all that good stuff. Everyone says, great, goes home. Come back the next morning, 10 o'clock, we all sit back in the room. And as the attorneys are fiddling with papers, the buyers say out loud, hey, we just had a quick question. We couldn't figure out the hot water in the master bedroom and wondered, you know, it seemed to work at the inspection, but it doesn't seem to work. And so we're all kind of like looking at them like, well, what do you mean the hot water doesn't work? And their agent, just as baffled, say, well, I thought that worked during the walkthrough. And they said, well, yeah, you seem to be able to make it work, buyer's agent. But this morning when we went to take our showers, we couldn't seem to make it work. And so we're just wondering, is there a trick that we're not, you know, doing? And so we're all looking at them like, wait a minute, what are you talking about this morning when you went to take a shower? Yes, they didn't close the day before and they had been given the key. No one said to them, please don't go and occupy the house. So they went in and moved in with a mattress, slept in the house overnight, got up that morning prior to them owning the property. That's an insurance and legal nightmare waiting to happen, right? I won't bore you with the other two stories that I can tell you, but please note, the key to the house should be delivered to the attorney by you or to the attorney by the seller. I'm okay either way, whichever is more convenient. Because sometimes the seller has a key that can be delivered to the attorney and the one in the lockbox just comes back with you to the office. That key doesn't necessarily have to be the one that goes to the attorney to transfer. And again, I know I get a lot of pushback on key protocol, but I've also been on the receiving end of potential disasters. And I've also been on the receiving end where things go wrong and no one can find the key, right? I'll give you this one. 2 years ago, we all of a sudden, just crazy screaming people on the telephone to me, to the buyer's agent. And the screaming was from the listing agent, the listing agent's broker, and the listing attorney. Why? Well, because the buyer's attorney said to the buyer's agent, who was ours, by the way, the list side said, just give the key to the buyers at the walkthrough. And so that's what was done. And then the closing got delayed by a couple of days for reasons I can't even remember. So the buyers are walking around with the key, and then the sellers had to fix something and get somebody in there and no one had a key to the house because no one could locate the buyers who had the key. So even though the list side said, go ahead and do that, they were all bent out of shape because we just followed their instructions. But then when they couldn't find the key, everyone's hair was on fire, right? So I've experienced too many key dramas to not say to you that the simplest path here is, my opinion is that the attorney should be the one to convey the key. Whenever I buy an investment property, The keys come to me delivered from the seller's attorney to the buyer's attorney when they're passing paperwork back and forth. They come to me via that delivery. I don't take them out before the closing, and I don't wait for the listing agent to give them to me. Yes, Donna.
Also, make sure that your sellers don't drive away with the garage door openers in their car.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one too, right? Okay, we're done. Here we go. No, wait, come back. Right. So you can see, I'm sure, how checklists for all this stuff, right, can help you not have drama. Because that's the whole point of all this. What if you could just move forward and not have drama? Oh, goodness me. That's a happy day in my world, no drama. Number 34, make sure sellers know when the buyer's agent will do the walkthrough, go to the closing with the seller, right? And so you want to know when the walkthrough is going to be, just to finagle that key thing. If the lockbox is still on, they can still do it and use the key in the lockbox. If you've already removed the lockbox, well, then the buyer's agent has to know they have to come and get the key from you prior to going to the walkthrough, right? So you make those decisions about best practices. Just make sure that there's communication around where the key actually is. I one time had a closing on like the ass end of Monroe. I shouldn't call it the ass end of Monroe, but it really kind of is the ass end of Monroe. You know, from when you live and work in Ridgefield, that side of Monroe is the ass end of Monroe. And so I met the buyers at the office, and I drove the buyers all the way to the ass end of Monroe and got out of the car and expected to see a key box with a key on it to let them in for the walkthrough. And there was no key box. And so I'm calling the brokerage. And this was not a large brokerage. It wasn't a major brand brokerage. It was a one-person shop, and she wasn't in the office. She wasn't answering her cell phone. Couldn't find the key. I had driven 45 minutes to the walkthrough with my clients in the car, only to have to come back to Danbury to close. So I certainly wasn't going to come all the way back. And oh, by the way, the brokerage was in Danbury for this Monroe property. So even if she had answered and said, oh yes, the key is in my office, that would have meant going back to Danbury, going back to Monroe to go back to Danbury for the closing. So the happy news is that, well, there was two pieces of happy news. One, my talents also happened to include squeezing through a window that was not quite locked. So we kind of walked around and see how else can we get into this property. And in the back, the laundry room window, which was one of those little narrower windows, you could see on the top that the window itself wasn't locked. However, there was a screen in place. And so I said to the buyers, look, you're about to own this property. Do I have your permission to make a slice on the screen on either side so I can get my fingers in to pop the screen, pop it out, and then get into the house? And they said, well, what's the alternative? And I said, well, the alternative is wait for this person to call me back, drive back to Danbury, get the key, come back here to do the walkthrough, and then go back to Danbury for the closing. They're like, I'll do it. Here, let's get the screen out. And so we kind of broke into the house. Luckily, too, he was big and I'm not all that big. And so he kind of just pushed me into the window. And we got the door open and did our walkthrough. But again, with proper communication around where the key to the house is, that doesn't happen. Make sense? So number 34 also dates this document. It says go to the closing with the seller, even if the seller will not attend. Again, most agents don't go to most closings nowadays, right? Oftentimes clients don't go to actual closings anymore, right? So this just dates that document. Number 35, report the property is sold in the MLS, again, within 24 hours of that status being changed, because that's the new rule. And now here's just a quick reminder, right? We talked about this when we discussed orphans. Do you remember our orphan discussion? And so I told you that the orphan program that I suggest is the same as the follow-up system for either your buyer or your sellers who have closed. And that is make a call within 24 hours, make another call within 1 week, and make another call within 30 days. And so that's pretty much what the rest of this document talks about, in that a day, within 24 hours after the closing, they should get a phone call. Minimally to say, thank you so much for your business. Maximally to say, hey, have you arrived at your new home? If you're moving away, have you arrived at your new home? How's that going? Anything I can do? Or whatever, right? Somewhere in there, there's a closing gift. I think 37 says send a closing gift. So you can either deliver that to them prior to the closing or send it after the closing, whatever makes sense for you. If a closing gift is part of your plan, just work that in pre or post.
And what's the budget for that usually? People are all over the place. I know I have a set thing, whether it's like over 500,000 or, you know, different rates, but isn't only $25 of it allowed to be written off for taxes?
Well, so let's address this in two different ways, right? Because there are two $25 rules that you need to be aware of. The first is, yes, the IRS says that $25, unless it's branded and can be considered as advertising or marketing, right? So if it's branded and can be considered advertising or marketing, there is no, as far as the IRS is concerned, there is no limit. If it's just a gift, a thank you gift, you are limited to a $25 write-off on that. From the IRS's perspective, if you spent $500 on it and you wrote off $25 of the $500, you'd be in compliance on the IRS side. Again, unless it's marketing or advertising, right? That's one of the things. What's that knife company, Cutco, right? Talks a lot about the fact that when they engrave your knife, you now have marketing or advertising, and so you can deduct the whole $300 on the knife that you just spent or whatever it was. The other side is licensing law, right? Licensing law in Connecticut also says that any gift or anything to a client, past or present, should not exceed $25. And so there's where you could run into issues if you were ever, I don't know, audited or put on the stand for some reason. I'm not right, but that is the rule at DCP. Do people spend more than $25 on closing gifts? They do. Know what the rules are and make your decisions accordingly.
Can you do $25 per person, man, woman, and children?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I don't know that the statute is that specific, right? So you could certainly do that, and if anyone ever came and asked you about it or was looking to slap your wrist on it, you could certainly use that as a defense, right? Debbie, what do you do on the closing gift side?
We
Hold on
have,
a second.
yeah, we have,
And then, of course, lastly, you want to just make sure that you put your seller on a post-closing follow-up system, like your 36 touch, and include them in the things that you are going to market for the next 12 months, right? And then go list another one. Oh, excuse me, as I yawn in your ears. I apologize for that. Any questions on that checklist, on the anatomy of a seller transaction? You have crystal clarity around that now? Perfect, perfect, perfect. All right. Any questions on the list side of things that we either didn't cover or that you're confused about or that you wanted to make a point of having a further discussion on? Anything that we've covered over the last couple of days on the list side? Pre-listing package, qualification script, the consult, the SPA, pricing and positioning, the anatomy of a seller transaction. Y'all good? Okay. So with that, and knowing that last night I told you how far behind we are going to make a quick jump from listings. I know this is an abrupt jump, but from listings to mastering the buyer side consultation, right? You have those scripts again on the, let me give you the link again in the chat. For those of you who don't have it saved, here is the link. You can go there and grab Mastering the Buyer Consultation
Rick,
Scripts.
I did have one question.
Yes,
that I
ma'am.
had put in the, that I put in the chat box. When you were talking earlier about the contract information sheet, is that some sort of form we have someplace? Where do we find that?
Yeah, that should exist in our Command and DocuSign libraries. Yeah,
Right, thank you.
you're welcome. You're still muted, Deb.
Oh, gosh, I thought I wasn't. It's also an MLS document. You can get it MLS or DocuSign or Command.
Right, thank
Yeah.
you.
And Debbie, you still use that form, right, on the list side?
I find I'm a visual person. I like to have all of the details in one spot, and that does it for me.
Excellent.
Just easy.
Any other questions on the listing side? Y'all gonna go and list a couple of properties between now and Sunday? Say yes. The answer to that is yes. Say yes, Rick, at least 4. All right. So let's make that jump over to mastering the buyer consultation, right? And so the buyer consult, we will get through faster because you've been through the listing consult side of things, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer consult is longer or shorter. However, it does mean that we'll be able to move through the scripts a little bit faster simply because you have already in your heads an understanding of what a consultation actually looks like, right? What it sounds like from the listing side. And so the buyer side is, you'll find, is very, very similar. And you have scripts in front of you. We're only going to go through some of the steps, and I'll explain why that is. So let's start with, well, before we get there, let me talk with you a little bit about the buyer consult. When you set an appointment with a buyer, right, one of the biggest mistakes I believe you can make is setting an appointment to go and show property because either someone has asked to go see property or you believe that that's what they are looking for and don't ask any questions around it without first having a buyer consult. Now, the buyer consult can be in the office, which we encourage, face-to-face with the new buyer. We also encourage you to utilize Zoom as a means of convenience. I love the idea nowadays of having a buyer agree to a buyer consult that can be done via Zoom on a Tuesday or a Thursday night after they get home from work, so that the weekend can be spent meeting at the office and then just go and seeing properties, right? Trust me when I tell you, that's what the clients want. The clients don't want to meet you at 10 o'clock in the office to have a 45-minute consult. They want to go and see property. So the idea of using Zoom, now that so many people are used to a Zoom environment, the idea of using Zoom earlier in the week for the consult to get that piece of it out of the way, which lines you up to only go see properties, which again is really what they want anyway on the weekends, I think is a winning combo. Anybody doing that at present?
I just did this last week again. And the cool thing that you can do, one of the cool things you can do is you can engage your mortgage person at the same time. Within 45 minutes, you can go through all of the consultation of what are they looking for, figure out what they can actually afford, and have them understand the process at a level that they don't typically. It's just like magic. I love the Zoom consultation.
Yeah, and I have to reiterate that it's not just Debbie who loves it. And it's not just the agent who loves it. The clients actually love that process as well, because again, 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, they just want to go and see the properties. And part of, now that doesn't mean that you can't combine the consult with showing properties on a Saturday or Sunday morning. It just creates more that has to get done before they can get in the car and go see a house, right? So if you could get that part out of the way ahead of time, know that you're hired, and then just go and meet them for the showings, I don't know. I just think that's a win all around. So again, you'll work through those best practices, but the idea of having Zoom available, and I'll tell you what, before the pandemic arrived, we weren't doing that. That's one of those things that arrived with the pandemic that was kind of a positive, right? The idea of using Zoom as the consult ahead of time. And we'll go through that, what that consult looks like with you. I think many of you went and got those scripts, so we can start working through those.
Rick, I have a
Yes,
question.
Dana.
Debbie mentioned that she brings in the mortgage banker to the consult. How does she do this? Does she call them, one of the mortgage partners, ahead of time and say, I'm meeting with the Smiths via Zoom at 7 o'clock? Can you be there too? Is that how she does it?
Yeah, absolutely. She'll just call one of our partners and of course have a conversation with the buyers to say, okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, what I'm going to do is also set up a mortgage consult at the exact same time so that we can have our consultation, figure out things on the real estate side, and then pass you right to the mortgage consult, or have the mortgage consult first and then come back to me, however that works, right? So you're just having a conversation with all parties to push everybody into the same Zoom call ahead of time. And it works like a charm.
Okay.
And I love the video aspect of connecting them with the mortgage partner as well, right? Because oftentimes it's just a phone call. All right, so setting the stage, step number one, setting the stage on the buy side. Again, this is designed as if you are meeting them at the office. And so if you're doing a Zoom consult, you'll clearly change some of the words, right? If they're not actually in your office, but we'll assume that you're meeting in the office just for the sake of argument. And if it's all right, I'm going to run this through. So listen through as you're reading along, and then let's have a conversation around it. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. My name is, yes, I got stuck on my name. Does that tell you that it might be time to finish for the day? Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I'm Rick. It's lovely to meet you. Did you have any trouble finding the office? Oh, that's great. Hey, listen, before we get started, can I get you some water or something to drink? I am really excited to start this home search process with you today. First, I am going to take a minute and turn off my cell phone so that we don't have any interruptions. Now, I want you to know that today's meeting is all about you. My job today is to keep us focused to find out what kind of home will suit your lifestyle, your needs, your wants, and your budget. We'll talk about the home buying process a little bit, and I'll answer any and all of your questions and then discuss our expectations and roles in this relationship. I'm curious, how does that sound? Excellent. So there are really three possible outcomes to today's meeting. One, you will understand all the benefits that I can provide to you in your home search, and you'll hire me as your buyer's agent. Number two, after hearing what I can offer, you may decide that what I bring to the table is not a good fit for you and your family and choose not to hire me. Or three, it is possible that I may determine that I cannot meet or exceed the expectations that you have set and will choose to turn you down now rather than let you down later. Does that make sense? Great. So let's switch gears and talk about the home that you want. I'm going to be asking a whole lot of questions in order to develop a clear understanding of what you are looking for in your next home. That way, I won't waste your time by taking you to see properties that don't suit you. How does that sound? So there's your setting the stage script. if you notice, and I'm going to turn this over to you guys in just half a second about what you noticed, but I want to point out to you in the listing setting the stage, we had an intro, an agenda, and then we had some closing, the closing section. If you notice that this is set up the exact same way, right? The first 3 paragraphs are the intro. That next paragraph is the agenda, outlining what we're going to do. And then that 1, 2, 3, that 5th paragraph, the longest paragraph there, allows people to understand what we're here for, right? So it's kind of that closing piece as well. And then at the bottom, we just kind of move them to another version, or another section of the console. So what did you hear? What questions do you have around this setting the stage? What did you love? What didn't you love? Any questions that you have?
I have a question, Rick.
Yes, John.
So I feel like this script is kind of geared a little bit more towards like when you're talking to like a stranger. How do you like say that to someone that you already have like you're actually like know and you're friends with, without sounding too, you know, strict and like uptight? You know, you still want to be professional. I get, obviously, but like, you know, without sounding like you're reading something off of paper.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And my answer to that, some people may not like. My answer to that is, I believe you should treat everybody exactly the same. If you have a relationship with somebody versus no relationship with somebody, you walk them through the exact same process. Because when you start changing things for your friends or your family members or your neighbors or your college roommates or your whomevers, right? You start shortcutting the process a bit. And what I can tell you is the only times that I've ever struggled with buyers is when I have shortcut the process in the beginning, only to have that show up later on, right? And so if you struggle a bit with sounding too real estate-y with people that you know, you could just add a line up front, right? I could say to you, hey, you know what, John, look, this may sound even a little bit weird. However, it's important to me that from a professional, from the professional side of things, that I give you everything that I would give a stranger. I want to take nothing for granted. So if it's all right with you, I'm gonna kind of walk us through this this consult as if we aren't really good friends, as if we don't have a 10-year relationship, as if we haven't, you know, whatever, right? So you could preface it by just kind of just being upfront to say, look, my ability to be a professional for and with you is important enough to me that I'm not going to take any shortcuts here. And then just go and do your thing. There's nothing wrong with that. How does that sound? Does that sound like it might help make things less weird, John?
Yeah, definitely. Cause like I kind of had like a buyer consult, kind of sort of, and it was like with a coworker, and I kind of like was unprepared, but like nearly not like as prepared as I should have been, kind of. But as I said, like she's someone I already knew.
Yeah.
And like after one meeting with Jen Henry and doing my buyer consult appointment, like and talking that over, and then 2 going through all these Ignite classes, I learned a lot more about actually presenting the buyer consult than I did when I actually spoke with her the first time. And so I'm actually supposed to be talking to her sometime later after this call. I'm gonna be shooting her a call. So now like having all this information, it's like I can better help her because,
Yeah.
as you said, I'm not taking the shortcuts.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah,
to
it's
sum up your answer is kind of like the answer to like solution to having a script is just when you're dealing with someone, have another script for that person, you know, which is, hey, I know not to sound like awkward or anything, but I don't want to take any shortcuts, whatever. I don't know how you word. You worded it up a lot better than what I did, but have a script for your script, kind of.
Right. That's simply because I've been talking to buyers for longer than you've been alive. Right. And so the idea of having that practice, right? And so that's all you need. You like absorb a lot of this stuff and practice it. It's just, again, it's just like going to the gym, right? You can't lift a certain amount of weight. You can't run a certain distance when you first start, right? It's tough to do, but then you get better and better and better and better. You can lift more, you can run faster, you can run longer because you just have the experience. Don't let that deter you, right? And don't be afraid. It took me a long time to get through the how do I have to appear to people, right, phase to get to the other side of that, which is here. So here's me, and I'm just going to confidently have a human conversation with you, even if that makes me look a little dorky, even if if I say something that someone's like, oh my goodness, really? You're just kind of, because as I said to you guys last week, in my world today, instead of going out of my way to sound sincere, I would just rather say, hey, you know what, John, look, I want to be as sincere as I possibly can. So if it's all right with you, if we can just kind of get down to the things that are really important to you, I have a couple of questions I want to ask. I'd rather just say what I'm about to be instead of working to be it, and then just be it. You know what I mean? I don't think I'm saying that all that well, but I think you get the point. Any other questions on the setting the stage piece of the buyer consult? Yes. Oh, no, I thought I saw somebody unmute. Anybody? Are you brave enough to actually say, so there are really 3 possible outcomes to today's meeting? Because I'm fascinated by the fact that nobody brought that up. Because I'm certain that most of you don't say it today. Right, so the question becomes, are you looking at that as, oh, well, that's that classroom version of this buyer consult, but when I really get in front of somebody, why would I ever say that? Or will you be courageous enough to recognize that setting the stage for this being a hiring conversation, right? Because that's why that's so important. People need to know what they're there to do. And if you don't tell them that this is a hiring consultation and that there's 3 different ways this can go, yes, no, or no, when you spring the buyer form on them later on, if you haven't told them that's what you're going to do, they're like, whoa, holy cow, now you're coming on a little strong. It's no wonder that sometimes people feel a little ambushed by this is a form you must sign and the law says that you have to, or I can't take you out to see a house. They feel ambushed and kind of strong-armed into an agreement because what they really want to do is go and see a house. And you didn't let them know right up front, look, what we're here to do today is uncover all of your wants, needs, and desires. And before we finish, we're going to have the conversation around whether you choose to hire me or not. And here's how that can go. Right, I'm just paraphrasing the script I just gave you. But do you see the importance of that? Do you see the mistake of not setting that expectation, going through the rest of the process, and then, surprise, here's this document? Do you see why sometimes people push back on that if you haven't set the expectation up front? So the point I'm looking to make to you is you need to recognize that expectation setting is the reason we do these consults. It's where all the expectations are laid out. Theirs, yours, everybody's. If you will say up front, this is a hiring, what's the deal here? Really 3 possible outcomes to today's meeting, right? You'll hire me, you won't hire me, or based on my inability to meet or exceed your needs, I may choose not to let you down now rather than to turn you down now rather than let you down later. If you go through those three options, you're offering options, right? You're not saying up front, and by the way, in about 26 minutes, you will hire me, right? That's not the point. You're telling them that this is going to go a couple of different ways. I'll tell you that for me, I used to add a little humor into this. My script was, this will go one of three different ways. One, you'll understand all the benefits that I can provide to you in your home search, and you'll hire me as your buyer's agent. And you know what? That would be awesome. Number two is, after hearing what I can offer you, you may decide that what I bring to the table is not a good fit for you and your family, and you may choose not to hire me, which frankly would be less awesome. Or three, it's possible that I may determine that I cannot meet or exceed the expectations that you have set and will choose to turn you down now rather than let you down later. Please note, that doesn't happen terribly often. However, I only ever want to show up and exceed your expectations. And so if I really feel like I can't do that, we may just have to agree to disagree on a path moving forward together. I hope that makes sense, right? So just kind of explaining a little bit why those three things exist, for me, helped people understand them a little bit better. So if that's helpful to you. John and then Alex.
I really like the last part of that script because, like, especially for me as a new agent, because I have no business, me showing that one, I will turn you down, it shows, like, in a way that I'm not desperate for business, even for, like, so that I'm, like, even though I'm new, and pretty much also, it also kind of, like, sets, like, the tone as for, like, I feel like that sets the stage more so than the first two, because it just, if I turn you down, most of the time they'll never hear that. They'll think that all realtors are just salespeople at the end of the day, and salespeople are just salespeople. But it's like, no, I can turn you down as well, because as you said, I can't meet the expectation or whatever the reason may be.
Yeah, and it's really important to make sure that people understand that last option of turning them down now rather than letting them down later is that let you down later is the reason, right? We're choosing not to get into business together because of your expectations, because of your desires, right? I'm saying no to you on your behalf, right? It's still about them. That's just be certain you don't turn that into you making a judgment call. Nope, you're not good enough. You're not going to work. You don't check all the boxes, right? That's not what that says. So be certain that anytime that's delivered, it's always about, I'm fearful, I'm concerned that I won't be able to meet your expectations. That's when that would occur, right? Alex.
Sorry. So Dana and I actually were reading this through and talking about it in our script practice. And our question was, do you go to this, do you kind of judge the temperature in the room and go to that third, I may not be able to blah, blah, blah. If that's where you sense things might be going, how do you judge that? And do you use it all the time?
So great question. And here's how I'll answer that. Generally speaking, unless you've had a lengthy kind of pre-qualifying conversation on the telephone with a buyer prior to this consult appointment, it's unlikely you'll have enough information at this point in the consult to be able to really make that decision, to make that call, right? As to whether or not you can meet or exceed people's expectations. The expectations are going to come in the next couple of steps of needs analysis, right? What is it you're looking for? What's driving the whole to do, right? So for me, I personally feel like you likely don't have enough info yet to make that determination. Therefore, I would utilize it just in case it comes up later, right? It's still an expectation setting conversation, and you don't know enough yet as to whether or not it may be relevant. So saying it, again, it doesn't hurt anybody to
Yeah.
actually set it, to lay it out there. And as a matter of fact, I think it kind of helps, because I look at that as it's a partnership builder, right? That here are all the different ways this can go down, and it's all built on my ability or inability to meet or exceed your expectations.
You know, I hear that, and I know that that's the case, but I also know that people don't, it's very it's counterintuitive, as John was saying, that you're able to then say, I don't think people necessarily hear, I may or may not be able to make you happy because of who and what, because of what you're bringing. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And what I would say is if that's a concern, what if you just added that into the script? What you just said, what if you just added that in
Yeah,
there?
I mean, I would,
Right.
I probably would. I'd be like, and then there's this other way it could go, which is, and be very specific about, because I'm not sure at this moment that we're a perfect match or a fit or something
Yeah.
to that effect.
Yeah, yeah. And again, here's the other thing I'll warn against. I think if you get too wrapped up in explaining each of these things, I think all of a sudden now, A, you start to lose people, and B, it's like if somebody walked, what's a good example of this? It's like calling attention to something that nobody would have paid much attention to until all of a sudden you're like, well, and let me just keep, and now you're underlining it and highlighting it and putting chaser lights around it, right? And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my goodness, it's like this whole consult is her telling me that she might not like me, right? So I think you have to find a balance. Go ahead, Debbie.
I think some of it relates also to realistic expectations and what's going on in the market. And we used that whole script much more with sellers when the seller market was hard, which was the whole last 15 years. We used that all the time, because if they had expectations for $1 million and they had a $600,000 house, there was just not enough time in the day. Today, that applies to buyers who think they're going to get a screaming deal on a house. They ain't, most likely. And if they think that, that may not be a realistic expectation. So you kind of, and so I would probably apply it after more conversation with the prospective client. Right.
And here's the other side of that. Remember that there's a phrase, right? A sentence after the I'd rather, I turn you down now rather than let you down later. The next line in the script is, I'm curious, does that make sense? And so you're actually doing a check-in right after you say it. So you may have some people say yes. You may have some people say, no, actually, that doesn't make sense. Could we talk a little bit more about that? And that's an entree into some of what you were explaining, Alex, right? And so weigh it from there, because you're doing that check-in to see, does that make sense? You may have just some people who say yes because they want to just move it along, right? But then at least you've said it and can go back to it if it's relevant later on. And at the end of the day, where I would advise you to go is trust the process, trust the words. And then if in fact you get, Donna Doyle, were you yawning, or was that like a terror look on your face? All of a sudden you looked.
It wasn't terror. I don't know. Maybe I sort of a silent yawn. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Not that you're boring me. You're not boring me.
No. I trust me. I wasn't concerned about that. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't terror, because as I said that, your face kind of changed, and I thought, oh
I
no.
don't know. It was involuntary.
Yes. Trust me, I have an involuntary face as well. I'm well aware of how my face can be different than what I intend to convey. Yeah, so where I was going, oh, trust it, and then see what happens, right? And be what's that word Marion used yesterday that I loved so much? Nimble, right? Be nimble enough in the moment to, if you sense all of a sudden someone's like, wait, what is she saying? Like, read their face, and you can say, you know what, I can tell by your reaction that sounds a little crazy to you, right? May I explain, right? So don't be afraid of reading people's body language and then reacting to it, or asking questions around it, or seeing if they need some additional information. That's really being in the moment, listening aggressively, being nimble in those when the opportunity comes to perhaps take it in a slightly different direction. Does that help, or did we confuse it even more? Okay, good. John, you have a question? Okay. All right, so let's move to step 2, the needs analysis. The needs analysis is the most important part of the entire buyer consult, right? It's kind of the reason you sit and have a buyer consult, is the needs analysis. The needs analysis is going to include the very last page of your documents. And that page looks like this. It's called the top 5 must-have list. That is the last page of this whole package. That kind of goes along with this needs analysis. So grab that if you would, so you can be kind of looking at that while you're looking at the scripts. Because the needs analysis references this top 5 must-have list. Now, a couple of things about the needs analysis before we do a little bit of an example. The needs analysis is typically the part of the buyer consult where that takes the longest. It's the longest part of the consult. And interestingly enough, it is the part of the consult where you speak the least. Right? Your role in the consult is to ask some questions and then listen aggressively, take a bunch of notes. Because what you're doing is you're helping the seller, sorry, the buyer, we've switched, haven't we? You're helping the buyer get clarity for themselves, and in the process, give you clarity about what it is they're really looking for and why. So let's take a look at the top part of that script, right? Step 2, top of the needs analysis. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, our goal today is to help you create your top 5 must-have list for your next home. In order to help you do that, I'd like to start by having you describe for me the home that you are currently living in. Why would we do that? Why would we ask them to describe the home that they're currently living in? Why is that relevant? Why does that help?
Gives you an idea for what they already like.
Right, so part of it is they're going to describe for you where they are, and it may give you an idea of the things that they like or don't like, right? Because they're moving on from where they're living. And so they may be able to describe for you, you know, we love our house, it's just not big enough. If we could find our house 1,000 square feet bigger with an extra bedroom and 2 extra baths, it'd be perfect, right? So tell me more about that, right? What does that look like? What's the style of the house? Where is it located? How much land, right? Give me the details of all of that. Why else might we ask them to start with the property that they are currently living in?
I like to know where they're coming from, you know, and sometimes, here's something, people don't know what square footage is.
Yeah.
You can ask, that'll be in there. You know, some people use metric as opposed to the other. I mean,
That
you know,
imperial, I think it's
they may,
imperial.
right. So you'll find these are some of the things that you may actually discover in this conversation.
Yeah,
You have no idea
100%.
what, right?
That's right. Yeah, if someone says, yeah, you know, I really need something that's like, you know, 700 square meters.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's get on a plane and go to France and we can find you that there, right? Because, you know, in the US, you don't use the metric system. And so it's a great example, right, that Alex uses. You get to understand where they're coming from, right? Why else might you start them with the house that they are living in?
Well,
Had
going back to
another-
what you, that's going back to what you were saying about the people not knowing about square feet. Also, it could be that what their problem is more the layout of what they're living in currently as opposed to the specific square feet. And maybe, if they had, let's say, an open floor plan instead of a home with rigid walls in place in that part of the house, it wouldn't matter if it was the exact same amount of square feet.
Yeah, so again, it gives them a platform to describe in detail the things that they may want to keep, the things they may want to change, the things that are important to them. What else?
I had a buyer from New York City who had lived in, in an apartment who didn't have any understanding of exterior architectural types. So I literally, and also probably didn't care much about what an exterior looked like
Mhm.
to them, So, whether something was a colonial or if it was a salt box or, these were terms that they had never understood. And there was cultural differences too. So not everybody knows how to talk about what they live in. Is it a split level? Those are things that we traffic in every day, but a buyer may not.
So to Alex's point, she kind of hit on one of the last reasons. People are unaware oftentimes of how to talk about not just the house they live in, but the house that they want to live in, right?
Right.
And so if we start them with the house they're living in, we're at least giving them the comfort of talking about something they know. Remember, everybody wants to look good and be right. So if you start them with something that they can be right about, that they know, that they don't have to feel like they're struggling, you can start to guide them through that conversation so that they have all the right answers. You'll pick up on either this comes easily to them or not, so that you can guide them through the next conversation about the house that they're looking for in a way that is appropriate for them, right? You want to give them tools to feel confident. So starting them with something they already know about does that, and give them the opportunity to model for themselves the exercise you're about to ask them to do, right? Because you're going to switch gears from here and ask them about the house that they're looking for. Well, now they've done for themselves the job of, okay, well, he just asked me about that house. Now I just have to take what I just said and turn it into about the house I'm going to. So they're actually modeling it for themselves. It's actually a practice run, right? For the real exercise that is even more important with where they're headed. So all those reasons, all those things combine to make starting with them in the house or the property or the living arrangements that they're currently in make sense. It doesn't matter if they're coming from their parents' house, from an apartment, from another house, from a mansion, downsizing, from a small condo to a larger home. None of that matters, because all the reasons you guys put on the table matter more than what they're coming from. You're still going to do that same exercise. John.
So kind of like Alex's buyer. I never heard of like colonial or ranch or any of that stuff. So like, where would I start learning about all that stuff?
MLS.
Oh,
So what I would encourage you to do is go to the MLS and look at colonials, run colonials and look at what colonials look like. Run capes, look at what capes look like. Google, you can also go to Google and Google, property types, New England property types or Connecticut property types, and kind of see what Google will bring you, because that you'll have a whole bunch of places for that, right? And then challenge yourself. The next time you're driving from wherever to wherever, don't not pay attention to the road, but as you're paying attention to the road, right, kind of quiz yourself, like, okay, what is that, right? Ranches are the one floor ones. right? Split levels or raised ranches are the ones that look like this. Colonials typically look like this. Oh, that's a cape. I recognize it because the roof line has the little dormers, little birdhouses out the front, and that's typically what capes have. So you get to learn the inventory by viewing it after you've kind of studied a little bit and given your brain something to actually start to look for.
But I think to be fair, John, you know, we're talking about how they look on the outside, identifying the architecture from the exterior. That's what we're talking about. And then there's more to it than that, but I can't necessarily tell a raised ranch from a split, right? Sometimes, I mean, just without going in, to be fair.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so like any place else, I would say, Google it, see what you can find online, use the MLS. Alex says, get a book about home styles, another great path. There's a bunch of different resources. Cool beans. All right, guys. So we were about to do an example of what a needs analysis looks like. We will start right at 4 o'clock tomorrow, our last day, with that example of a needs analysis. So somebody just be ready to be my buyer, right? You don't have to know any of the scripts. You just have to be able to answer about the house that you're looking for, right? And I'll kind of just walk you through an example of what a needs analysis looks like so you can hear it. And then we'll talk about utilizing the top 5 must-have list, and then jump to, I did say last day, right? Isn't tomorrow Thursday? Yeah, so tomorrow's Thursday. It is our last day. And so, yes, we will squeeze in the remainder of the buyer consult, and we will get through the anatomy of a buyer consult and still have time for the cat house story at the end. I promise that. So we will see you tomorrow. Read through the rest of these buyer scripts so that we can, so that you're familiar with them as we start tomorrow. Have a great one. We'll see you then.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rick.
Rick.
Sure thing.